All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating and honestly highly specific theoretical framework that we found in our sources. It suggests that the very phonetic syllables in our legal terminology are intricately tied to the massive financial and state systems that we live under. Basically, we're going to explore how the everyday words we speak might just be revealing hidden administrative structures. We're going to be tracing this from the microscopic syllables we speak, all the way to the macroscopic systems we live under. Here's our roadmap for today. First, decoding legal nomenclature. Second, in form at and the name. Third, funding the birth certificate. Fourth, custody, courts, and administration. And finally, number 5, the alien property custodian.
So let's kick things off with Section 1, decoding legal nomenclature. Now, historically and classically speaking, the word nomenclature simply means the calling or systematic arrangement of names. The universally accepted etymology traces it back to Latin, right? You have nomen, meaning name, and calare, meaning to call. It's just a system of naming things, especially in fields like science or law. But viewed through a theory our sources call phonetic exegesis, we are intentionally going to ignore those traditional Latin and French derivations. Instead, we're going to focus entirely on the spoken syllables. We're going to essentially dematerialize the compound word. The theory suggests a system that literally molds no man into an identifiable form. Just listen to the syllables. No, meaning an absence or stop, men, as in menkind, clay, a moldable material, and term, a resulting condition or representation. Kind of like nature or creature. So the theory proposes that nomenclature is quite literally the naming structure that stops the living flesh and blood man, molds him like clay, and creates a representation, or a legal fiction.
Which leads us right into Section 2, information and the name. It begs a pretty profound question, doesn't it? If nomenclature is the mold, what actually happens when a living, breathing being is placed into a legal form? How does a massive legal and financial system actually recognize them? Well, according to the text, the jurisdiction doesn't and actually cannot encounter the whole living being. A legal system doesn't interact with flesh and blood. It interacts with a formatted representation. Your name, your title, your account, your capacity. The theory proposes that you have been put in formation, literally placed into a form. And once your name is molded into that form, it enters specific administrative silos. The arrangement of your nomenclature, whether that's first, middle, last, or maybe last, first, middle, initial, that tells the receiving system exactly how to route you. These silos include things like sanctions records, like OFAC, tax ledgers, court records, banking files. The name basically acts as the account heading under which all your obligations and capacities are organized and controlled. All right, moving on to Section 3, funding the birth certificate. Because this molded representation has a definitive starting line, we have to look to the modern standardized birth certificate. And it didn't just appear overnight. It was a massive architecture built over decades. A pivotal moment highlighted in our sources is the 1921 Shepard-Towner Maternity and Infancy Act. This act is a prime example of how federal matching funds heavily influenced individual states to build standardized maternal and infant health administration. It was sold to the public as a way to reduce infant mortality, but the sources argue it ultimately created a nationwide mechanism for lifelong tracking and data collection. And look closely at how person or child is defined in these vital statistics codes. It doesn't just mean a human being. It explicitly includes a trust, an estate, a partnership, or even a corporation. The vital record is documenting the creation of a legal entity, that molded clay we were talking about earlier. Over time, the foundational architecture of that Shepard-Towner Act evolved. This cooperative federal-state funding loop still endures today, prominently in the Social Security Act. Through programs like Title IV-D for child support and Title IV-E for foster care, the federal government establishes the funding and the conditions. In return, the state supplies the local legal machinery. Interestingly, in places like New York City, birth certificates are actually issued by the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, which integrates local health administration directly into this massive federal funding loop. And because of these rigid data requirements, the birth certificate essentially functions as a foundational ticket. It remains a state-created record for sure, but the standardization, the financing, and the programmatic use are deeply integrated at the federal level. It officially places the nomenclature into the system. Okay, Section 4, custody, courts, and administration. So, once this formatted name is created, funded, and placed into these administrative silos, How is it legally managed? Well, the sources urge us to look at the origins of the word administration. Historically, administration actually has deep ecclesiastical or church-related origins. It's tied to the court of ordinary. An ordinary was a bishop or judicial officer with immediate jurisdiction over ecclesiastical causes, which heavily involved the administration of wills, probate, and guardianship. So the management of the legal person is deeply, deeply rooted in managing an estate.
And naturally, whoever manages that estate holds custody. Returning to our theory of phonetic exegesis, the sources explore breaking down the word customer or customary into exact syllables, just like we did with nomenclature. We're going to dematerialize it again. Think about it. CUS hints at customs or import and export. TO signifies a transfer, and MER points to the sea or maritime law. In this theoretical framework, being a customer hints at the literal transfer of commercial assets across jurisdictional seas.
And custodianship itself is not about wielding absolute, unchecked power. It's a position of strict legal accountability. According to the texts, this is managed through a very rigid 3-book trust system. First, you have Schedule A, which records exactly what the estate owns. Then, the float ledger, which is the trust's running log of every outward-facing act. It's basically a strict fiduciary interface, logging every notice and correspondence. And finally, the account ledger, which records the money or remedy flowing from those interactions. This is how the nomenclature is meticulously tracked.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, the alien property custodian. So how do all these concepts, the molded name, the vital records as tickets, the ecclesiastical administration, how do they culminate in massive financial architectures during times of emergency? Our sources point to the Trading with the Enemy Act, which outlines an absolutely incredible mechanism of acquittance. It states that any payment, conveyance, transfer, assignment, or delivery of money or property made to the alien property custodian under hereto shall be a full acquittance and discharge for all purposes of the obligation. It represents an ultimate mechanism of legal and financial settlement within the state's architecture.
Within this phonetic and theoretical framework, the concept of surrender takes on a highly specific, almost literal meaning. Let's dematerialize it one last time. To surrender is to yield the form, that molded nomenclature, the ticket, the legal fiction, back to the system that created it. Surrendering to an entity like the alien property custodian acts as a total discharge of obligation, neatly tying that molded name back to the ultimate administrator.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound puzzle to consider. The sources we've explored today suggest that the very syllables we speak are revealing these hidden administrative architectures. If nomenclature is truly a moldable form, a legal fiction placed into massive silos of information, tracked by 3-book ledgers, and governed by ecclesiastical roots of custody, well, it forces us to ask, how exactly is your nomenclature being administered today? It is a fascinating perspective that absolutely makes you rethink the words you use every single day.